So the whole challenge for governments is to, at the same time, give incentives for people to become innovators, to give them grants, but make sure that they don't use these grants to later on prevent new innovators from coming in.
This could be the basis for a European program for sustainable growth, because transition towards sustainability requires substantial investments in sustainable energy, increased energy efficiency, public transport and infrastructure and so on.
If you subsidize a firm to do more R&D, it should choose projects that it wouldn't have done if it hadn't had the subsidy. That means that the return should be lower than the return without the subsidy.
It's not so much the buying up that's the problem, is what then is the system, the ecosystem, what happens to the research and the thinking, the out-of-the-box thinking of those small companies when they're bought up by an ultra-financialized large company, which is different from a non-financialized company.
And that was basically Schumpeter's basic perspective, that the success of a market economy is that entrepreneurial spirit, people having an idea, and in the quest for new technologies that address the needs of society, standards of living will increase.
Yes, if you want, you will find an excuse, but try not to, because finding an excuse is like walking your life with your eyes closed, because it's 21st century and the problems are here.
In that sense, you can see that Schumpeter's contribution on entrepreneurship and growth added an element which has been ignored. I think that my predecessors, from Philippe Aghion down to Jan Vageberg, have all highlighted the importance of research, of innovation in terms of economic growth. What Schumpeter added was this individual entrepreneurship element, which has never really been included into economic theory.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, señoras y señores. It's an honor from the Commission to welcome you to this Schumpeter lesson, Innovation in Enterprise here in Bilbao. This is the first event of the 2023 SME Assembly taking place in Bilbao, and we welcome you in cooperation with the Spanish Presidency of the Council and our Basque partner of Enterprise Europe Network. Welcome to this Guggenheim Museum, a masterpiece of architecture. What a nice start, what a nice way to start this SME Assembly. And thanks to all of you for coming here tonight. We are in this room about 200 people, but we have a parallel room as well, where my colleague Igor is. Igor, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me, Bonnie?
Good.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Hello from the atrium. We are also here very much looking forward to listening to the lecture of the Professor Sarasvathy. So for the moment, that's all from here, and looking forward to hearing you. Bye.
This is looking quite professional, so it's working well. So I'm very happy. And we certainly have Professor Mrs. Sarasvathy. It's an honor. And she's going to be introduced by my colleague, Mrs. Uti Slavon. Uti, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. On behalf of the European Commission, our partners in the Spanish Presidency, and the SPRI, our Basque partner, I'm very pleased to welcome you to the 2023 Schumpeter Lecture, Innovation in Enterprise. Where you name a lecture after an economist as well known as influential as Joseph Schumpeter. Finding the right quote to introduce the lecture is never very easy. But I have picked the following quote from Schumpeter, which I believe fits very well with our special guest, our distinguished speaker this evening. The quote goes, "One does not make a difference unless it is a difference in people's lives." Tonight's distinguished speaker certainly wants to make a difference and has made a difference in people's lives. Over the past 30 years, Professor Sarasvathy has worked to establish a rigorous framework for entrepreneurship policy. At this year's Schumpeter lecture, she will advocate entrepreneurship as a method to be taught not only to who could be a potential entrepreneur, but to everyone, just as in schools we teach science to everybody. The aim is to create a society which is capable of action to build enduring and robust socio-economic communities. Communities where the basis is so-called middle class of business. Not only startups, not only unicorns, but the hardcore of the normal solid businesses which offer good services, good products, produced by labor the companies can rely on. And it is very much these companies which together knit our social fabric. Professor Sarasvathy has also made a difference in her personal life by not only teaching entrepreneurship, but by being what we call a serial entrepreneur. She has founded 5 companies herself. She doesn't only talk about business, she knows what it means to build a business and to run a business. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome Saras Sarasvathy, the Paul M. Hammaker Professor of Business Administration at the Darden School of Business of the University of Virginia. So, very welcome, Professor.
Thank you, Uti, and thank you, Bonifacio, if I may say the name correctly. And most importantly, thank you all for coming here and spending an evening without maybe knowing what you're in for in some ways. And my mom always says that past performance does not count. So every time you do something, you have to earn it again. And so I will try to earn this lecture. So I want to begin by kind of saying that I'm tickled pink, right? To be here, to be giving the Schumpeter lecture. This is like my chemo chic, by the way. But also because it's a little ironic. So having been an entrepreneur for a very long time, when I came into academia, and if I'm not looking up there, it's because I cannot quite see you very well in the back, but I'm going to try to address everyone. So when I came into academia with this idea that I wanted to understand rigorously what we should be teaching, and it was bothering me that we are not teaching entrepreneurship at all in most business schools. When I went to business school, there was no entrepreneurship courses even. And so when I came into academia, people and a lot of economic professors, people who are either economists or teaching from an economics perspective, even in a business school, they told me that entrepreneurship research is an oxymoron, right? I wanted to do a PhD in entrepreneurship, and there was no such thing, even in the United States. And so the idea of oxymoron or moron would come up once in a, and then here are some reasons they gave me for it. So one person said, it's like art. You cannot study it. And I was like, we are literally standing in a building, right next to a building, where they study art and they give out PhDs, right, in music, in drama, in fine arts, in literature, and so on. So I sort of ignored him. Another one said that there is nothing to study there, right? It's just a statistical artifact. Look at the failure rate. If enough idiots start enough companies, right, that's all we need in an economy, and some will succeed, and then they will claim that there is something there, but there is no there. And that worried me a little bit until I looked it up and I started looking at, even today people say this, but it's actually, when you look at the numbers, the definitions, the way people actually think about this, and the fact that they confuse firms with entrepreneurs, when you look at all of that, you know that that is actually not valid. And I am happy to give an entire lecture just on that topic for those of you who are interested. People go around saying that the failure rate is gigantic and so on. So, and the third one is where Schumpeter comes in, where they basically said, you know, we don't really need entrepreneurship research. We know all about it. Read Schumpeter, right? So I went and read Schumpeter, started with a small chapter that that person recommended on creative destruction. And I was like, okay, this is interesting, especially since he's talking about competition across markets rather than within markets, which is an insightful idea worth thinking about. And I also loved the way he wrote, and so I ended up reading the whole book. And nowadays I foist this book, this gigantic book, Capitalism, Socialism, Democracy, on all my PhD students, so have read it and discussed it over and over again over the years, and it's fascinating. But one thing is very clear, there is virtually no theory of the entrepreneur or what entrepreneurs do. There is literally no microeconomic theory that has a role for an entrepreneur in economics. And that is true even today. You saw Professor Stiglitz calling it entrepreneurial spirit. Keynes called it animal spirits. Right? Frank Knight, who actually was writing a dissertation that was relevant to entrepreneurship on uncertainty, he called it judgment. And he actually mentioned, I don't quite know how this judgment works. So basically, the theory of economics about entrepreneurs is somehow these mystical, magical idiots are going to do these things, right? They're going to do creative destruction, and they're going to deal with uncertainty, and they're going to create all these innovations, and they are going to harness the animal spirits in the economy and stuff like that. So I said, okay, I think there is work to be done here. And when Herbert Simon became my advisor, I also knew what I wanted to do, and I told him about it. I said, I'm going to create like the microeconomic theory of entrepreneurship, and it is going to be empirically solid and rigorous, right? And for those of you who may not know who Herbert Simon was, he won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1978, but he is also considered one of the founding fathers of artificial intelligence. And so my PhD turned out to be in information systems, believe it or not. And I used methods that they were using to build expert systems, which is the precursor of artificial intelligence in those days. I used those methods to study what I call expert entrepreneurs. And so that is where I'm going to begin. I'm hopefully going to spend only about 10 to 15 minutes basically talking about the last 25, I was trying to say 25, I think I'm in denial, 30 years, OT was right, of research into this. That is the first half. And then we'll spend a little bit of time looking at what is next and how more than people in entrepreneurship education and people who are just entrepreneurs, all of us can get involved in building this. So that's what I'm going to try and do, give a quick summary and then talk about action items that we can all get involved with based on the research here. And so the research consists in studying expert entrepreneurs, and literally through the research convince other academics first, which is a gigantic battle, by the way, that there is a there, and that is actually teachable and learnable, and it's different from the stuff that we have been teaching and learning so far. So here we go. So the original study, this is the research book, since I'm just going to do a very short summary. For those of you who have never heard of this and want to look it up, I'm providing some references, but there is also a website where you have a lot of these things. So this was the first research book, but the original study is basically trying to show what are the lessons that expert entrepreneurs learn. So the first thing I have to do is to define what an expert entrepreneur is. And the definition comes from cognitive science, where they study experts in a variety of domains. And an expert entrepreneur, I got to define in my dissertation as somebody who has 15 years or longer, full-time, immersive experience, starting and running multiple ventures, including success and failures, and taken at least one company public. There were only 245 people in the world who qualified by this definition. I wrote to all of them, and 45 people agreed to participate in the study. And as I told you, it was not just a set of interviews or cases. It was actually this think aloud protocol experiment that I have described elsewhere if you want to study, and it's there in the book as well. So this was a method where the whole idea is to extract their knowledge through this method from cognitive science, so look into their brains a little bit to figure out what they have learned. So from the finding, what are they expert in? So we have a definition of their experiences, but what is it that they are actually expert in? And that is a connection to Frank Knight. Turns out that they are actually experts in dealing with situation of true uncertainty, where the future is not only unknown, but unknowable, right? So this is a Frank Knight definition of uncertainty, the third kind of uncertainty. But here is the interesting thing. They're also very good at, because if you are going to deal with that kind of uncertainty, you won't know ahead of time exactly what needs to be done. So your goals can be ambiguous, and information is isotropic, which just means that you don't know what information is relevant and what is not relevant when you are dealing with something that is sort of Schumpeterian creative destruction, because the market doesn't exist. So it's like the quote that people keep talking about from Henry Ford, which may or may not be true, that if you go and ask a bunch of customers, what do you want, before the automobile industry came to be, they would say faster horses, right? And so, but if you're building an automobile industry, you're doing something really new, then it's not clear what information would be relevant. So lack of information is not the problem. Too much information and not knowing what is relevant. That should sound familiar to all of us here and to students everywhere as well. So they are very good at dealing with all three of these things together. And they've actually beautifully trade off some of them, which you will see when I get to the principles here. So as an entrepreneur, let me just tell you bottom line first. What is the main finding from the study? The main finding is this inversion of prediction and control, right? Normally, when we deal with uncertain situations, we know that the future is unpredictable, so we try to predict the best we can, and we are very aware that our predictions may be wrong, so we have plans, we have backup plans, we have scenario analysis, we do that kind of thing. The expert entrepreneurs look at the world based on their experiences, and they say, you know what? The future is fundamentally unpredictable, so let's not try to predict it. So throw away prediction. So everything they do, everything that I'm going to tell you here, is non-predictive. So they've developed a way of dealing with an uncertain world without using or without relying on predictive information. Okay? So that sounds intriguing to everybody? Yes? If you've never heard of it, if you've heard of it, you have an exam later. So if you've never heard of it, that sounds intriguing. But then we'll ask the question, then you say, oh, that's intriguing. What does that mean, though? How do you control a future that you cannot predict? Now, that looks like some kind of weird existential philosophical question. And so let me give the answer from a practical perspective. So it's really not about, some vague idea here. It's a bunch of real practicable lessons that they have learned. They're basically saying, work with things that are already within your control, and then you can shape and co-create the future. You don't need to predict it because it's like sculpture. You're working with clay. It's not a map that you're trying to build, trying to navigate the space and discover the future. You're literally going to build it. So you cannot look at a lump of clay and say, tell me what do you want to be. Although some sculptors will tell you that's how they do the intuiting of sculpting. But the idea here is you're working with things within your control. You're co-creating the future. But who are you co-creating with? Because it is terribly uncertain and you yourself don't know what the heck you're doing. And so you co-create with whoever self-selects into the process. And so now we are going to look into this a little bit more in depth and a little bit more practical way. So let's just start with what happened here, right? Traditionally, the view is the better you can predict the future, the better you can control it. That actually comes from science and the success of science over the last 200 years. But you can see the relationship between prediction and control is like a little point, right? It's a dimensionless point. These experienced entrepreneurs, through their experiences, they blow that up into a two-dimensional space. So they have separated prediction and control, and that actually gives you 4 quadrants to work with. So the one that we teach a lot is really high in prediction, but low in control. We call that the causal model. Or you can be low in prediction and low in control. This is what everybody says happens in Silicon Valley, that you are nimble and you're going to be quick and you're going to be adaptive, things like that. And then we have the more traditional visionary model, which is high in prediction and high in control. And people usually say, oh, Steve Jobs would never do anything that you are saying. And I will later on play a clip from Steve Jobs. You'll see what he says. But here the idea is high in prediction, high in control. You're passionate, you're persistent, you're going to convince people to come on board, and you're never going to give up. Well, it turns out that what expert entrepreneurs learn is really about low in prediction, high in control, as I told you. Just to give a little bit of context here, you can see already that this is not just about entrepreneurship. All of us live in that space, right? Have you gone dating lately? Whether you're 60 or whether you're 30, or are you raising children? So you think about all of us actually live in this space of varying predictability, but sometimes we don't realize that we actually have things within our control that we can work with and we can shape the future, that it's not all about trying to predict what will happen, avoid what should not happen, and then place bets on the future, right? So how do we navigate this space? And so you can call it whatever you want, I don't care. Some people like the prediction control space. Some people hate the word effectual. I don't care. I tell my students, if you never use the word effectual or effectuation, it's fine with me. And the same goes for this. And for some reason, people like this cave model just because it's the causal, adaptive, visionary, effectual forms a nice word, cave. So it's up to you. I'm going to leave that up to you. So now let's take this and let me give you a very simple practical way to look at this 2x2. So we are, as you can see, you're getting the findings from research that we have built on a lot since the original study. And then I'm giving you the findings in a nutshell, and now we are going deeper and more practical with each slide. So here, let's think about how does this work in practice. So one way to start thinking about it is when we teach people to start a company, and you can think about businesses, you can think about social ventures, you can think about many other things as well. But here I'll just stick to standard business here. You go do some market research, right? Talk to customers. Think about what does the customer really want. Figure out costs, basically try and forecast what your financial needs will be and what the risks might be so that you can calculate the risk-adjusted net present value, which you go and pitch to people, things like that. So the actions you take when you approach the problem of starting a company causally is stuff like this. If you're adaptive, you're basically saying, you know what, you need to pivot. You need to be ready to change. You're talking to customers, but you're also listening to what works and what doesn't work. Maybe you do a little bit of A/B testing. Maybe you just ask for advice and feedback, and different people will tell you what to do and what not to do. And depending on what advice and feedback you get, you keep changing, okay? The visionary something is the old version of entrepreneurship, which is follow your passion and persist and never give up. So what do we do on a practical basis in effectuation? Now I'm going to give you 5 principles, and you will see each of them inverts the logic of prediction that goes into the top left, but also the bottom left somewhat. So let's take a look at the 5 principles. So the first one is really just start with things within your control. What is your bird in hand? And so you're not thinking about, I want to do this goal, I have this idea or this market, this opportunity that I want to pursue. You just start with, look around you, look at yourself and say, what do I have within my control? Which is kind of the inverse of goal-driven thinking, right? So you're means-driven rather than goal-driven. So the next one is the affordable loss principle. So you've looked at your means and you're thinking, what can I do with what I already have within my control? So you're not asking, here's something I want to do, so what should I do? You're really asking, what can I do? And you're looking at, what can I do for affordable loss? Why? Because you're trying to control the downside. You're not trying to predict the future and tell people, here is why you should invest. You know why? Because I can give you the net present value of future cash flows, adjusted for risk, which is all prediction. Instead, you're actually asking, what can I afford to lose to do this? Would I want to do this even if I lose what I am putting in? So these are very different questions, very different techniques on thinking about the upside, thinking about the downside, and thinking about resources. Okay? So then we come to the third principle, which is the crazy quilt principle. This is the most important, and recently we've been trying to do a lot of work in this particular thing. So because if you start this way, it is not very clear how much money you need and who has the money. So because you're just doing things within your control, you're doing things for affordable loss, so who do you talk to? Basically, you talk to anybody and everybody. So watch out. I may be hitting up some of you on behalf of my students during the reception afterwards, right? So the idea is you meet people and you talk to them in such a way that you are asking them to come on board and work with you on your venture. And you're not really pitching them in the normal sense of the word. And you're thinking partnerships. You're always inviting people to work with you as much on their terms as yours. And you can think a little bit on what kinds of things you are willing to change if they want to work with you and they have very different terms. So we're going to look into this a little bit more in detail later. And when you start building the venture this way, you are going to get lots of surprises, positive and negative. The world is not waiting there doing nothing while you are building your venture effectually. So all kinds of things get thrown at you, and you get very good at incorporating surprises into the process. So this is the American saying, right? When life throws lemons at you, make lemonade. But you can also think about it as it's all about being open to surprises rather than ducking under it. When you build something causally, you don't want surprises because you have the perfect plan and you're going to go pitch somebody and who is going to help you build the venture. Then we come to the fifth and most important one, which is basically this understanding that the future comes from what you and I, human beings, choose to do. So we have the ability to co-create and shape the future. That it's not all about trying to predict it and place a bet in some way. So I'm going to pause here for a second, take a look at it, because I've just given you all the principles rather abstractly, right? So in the next slide, I'm going to walk you through it dynamically. So you have the 5 principles, and you think about how does it actually look on a day-to-day basis when you start building your venture. And we have written hundreds of cases of companies where we show how this works from around the world. Even as I speak here just now, there is the annual Effectuation Conference in Gdansk in Poland, and so I'm kind of torn that I'm here and not with them. And today morning, one of my colleagues presented this world map where he showed that 190 countries are now involved in writing cases, creating materials, but also doing research. And he even had a way of tracking activities. And there were, I mean, I literally have lost track of what's going on here. There are places where I would not have thought there was a single person who's doing anything with it, but there were like 20 events just in the last month or something. And so it's gone crazy on that front. So there are lots and lots of stories, and if you're here willing to stay with me till midnight, I'll tell you some stories of companies. But for the moment, I'm just going to walk you through one dynamic thing, and you can start thinking about what that venture could look like when it goes through the process. So let's look at the process slide here. So it's the same 5 principles, but now you're going to see it as a daily thing that entrepreneurs can do. So day 1, you start with your means. And the means that everybody has. Note that there is no money here at this point. It is just asking, who are you? Right? So you ask yourself, who am I? What do I know? And whom do I know? And that's why we can teach this to poor illiterate women in Bangladesh, right? So we're not looking for resources. The first thing, I had the most amazing moment in Brazil because there is an organization in Brazil that is teaching effectuation to poor illiterate women around Brazil in rural areas in difficult places. And I was invited to meet some of the entrepreneurs. And one of the entrepreneurs literally told me that I had been to other entrepreneurship classes, but this was the first one where they taught me to see myself as a resource, right? To see who I am as a resource. And then they said we took off from that, and then I could see around me like, what is not a resource, right? So she was like, everything is a resource after that. And she was talking about this attitude of abundance that she saw. And especially, and Slavitsa and I were talking about it yesterday, especially they see the moment you see yourself as a resource, you also see the other person as a resource. And you get this co-creative abundance that comes with you as well. So the day 1, and remember this data came from really successful entrepreneurs. Remember the definition of expert entrepreneurs, the 45 people, these were billionaires. And they learned a lesson that is applicable to poor illiterate women, which is kind of cool, don't you think? For a researcher, this is like, aha, this is what I live for. So you start with who am I, what do I know, whom do I know? This is day 1. And you also ask yourself, what can I do for affordable loss? And in the case of my Brazilian entrepreneur, she had a lot of talent and things. So she knew about, for example, African Brazilian women. And she was talking about hair, she was talking about cosmetics. They stitch their own clothes, and she suddenly realized there are lots of things that she can do. And she could actually now become an entrepreneur. So what is the difference between doing that and becoming an entrepreneur? And I was joking with Karen earlier about this. The difference is you've got to get people to pay for what you do, right? So day 1, all you need to do is come up with a bunch of things that you can do. But day 2, what you're doing is you're talking to people. You talk to anybody and everybody who's willing to talk to you. And what are you trying to do when you talk to them? I love to do interactive conversations, not lectures. But since this is a lecture and we are time constrained, I'm just going to answer my own questions. So when you talk to people, everybody thinks you're asking for advice, you're asking for feedback, you're asking for information, maybe you're asking for help. No. An entrepreneur asks for skin in the game, right? Entrepreneur says, I need a commitment. What's it going to take for you, not just to buy my product, which is non-existent, because I can show you a couple of things that I have done with hair or with my stitching or whatever, but I don't have the money to make that into a product. But if you buy it and give me advance money, then I'll go make it, right? So the issue here is to get people to commit before you even have a prototype. So literally the quotes from the expert entrepreneurs, you know what, I wouldn't do any of this market research business that I was taught at a school that starts with H, that I shall not name. But I would actually go in and find bunch of people and do a frontal lobotomy on them. And then I'm like, what are you talking about? And what he's trying to say is, even before I have a prototype, I would actually pre-sell it. So I end up building only things that actual customers want. Not predicted customers, not potential customers that I think will be customers. While I'm talking to all these people that I think are customers, there's a bunch of people over there who really want it, and they're willing to pay ahead of time. So when you talk to people, you're trying to gather real commitments. That's what allows you not to have to predict the future. And that is really hard to do, as you can imagine. But anytime somebody gives you a real commitment, not just advice, it's okay to get advice, it's not bad, but you need more than advice, right? And advice that comes with commitments is actually much better than just advice. So you get new means, so you have this expanding cycle of co-created resources. Very quickly, day 2, right? This is happening day 2. Day 2, it becomes about who we are, what we know. So the committed stakeholder becomes part of the venture very, very quickly. But people who are going to commit that early are going to not commit to your vision of the venture. They're going to commit to their vision of your venture in some ways. So they are going to suggest changes in the goals. And that's why not being overly tied to your goals becomes an actual resource in this process, right? So you also set up this converging cycle where it decides what we can and cannot do. And throughout this process, the outside surprises are hitting you, and they hit both your bird in hand and your affordable loss. And if you keep on doing this for a while, what you end up with is not just new products, not just innovations, not just new ventures, but actually new markets. And we have shown a lot of cases where these new markets, which is a very Schumpeterian idea, comes to be. But you can end up creating new futures altogether. And so now take a look at the process here and go back to the woman I was talking from Brazil. Because by talking to people, she realized she could sell not only to other African, Brazilian people, but there were all kinds of people who were interested in some of the things like the barrettes, like the thing that you put in your hair, the clips, the fancy clips. She actually gave me a couple of them. And now she sells in countries in Africa and other places and online, and you and I can go and buy as well. And so the idea really is, you can start with just who you are, what you know, and whom you know, and end up creating things that you yourself did not predict and you maybe did not even imagine. So there are 2 performance implications from this, and there is data to support it, but I'm just going to give you, and you can see just logically, the 2 implications you will understand just by looking at this process. So this is not about increasing the probability of your success. It is not about making you into a unicorn, right? And you guys know that unicorns are actually, they don't exist, right? It's a mythical beast. And you will see if you go look at the stories of unicorns that they are not what you think they are, and they did not become what they are through the ways that we think they become. Definitely not funding, but we'll talk more about that later. So what you get to see here is, if success happens, innovation is built into the process. Nobody has to be an innovative genius in this process. You can take a simple example of something like cooking. If you cook causally, if you're a good cook, you will end up cooking the dish you decided you want to cook. You'll have the ingredients, you'll have the recipes, you have the implements, you have the knowledge, you cook. But when you cook effectually, and you go in and look at your refrigerator, and you look in the garden, and then your neighbor walks in with you're going to make apple pie, you don't really have sugar, and your neighbor walks in and they have blueberries, and then you ask somebody, oh, they have a honeycomb, maybe we can get some honey. And you start doing, and you end up creating an innovative, weird one, which hopefully, if you're a good cook, will still taste okay, right? So the process itself leads you to innovation, whether you chose to be innovative to begin with or not. So if success happens, you get innovation. But what happens if failure happens? Because we are under uncertainty, failure also can happen. You can see in this process, nobody loses more than they can afford to lose. So the costs of failure are lower when you build it. And this is why this is the lesson that very, very, very experienced entrepreneurs who have built companies, been through success and failure, they learn the lesson of this process, really. So this brings me to the end of the summary of effectuation part. And I had mentioned to you that there are hundreds of cases that you can look at from multiple countries, multiple eras. I was telling Karen yesterday that somebody from Spain actually recently, about 5 years ago, wrote a paper showing how Picasso and Braque created cubism using effectuation principles. And as a result of that, Picasso's scholars, for whatever reason, love me, apparently. And I got to a lovely tour in Barcelona. But and so I was talking to Karen about it because we have a Picasso exhibition here. So not knowing anything about Picasso or art, now I am into this thing just because of the research that we do. So when you look at this, this is something we want to think about. But the real insight for this actually came when we started trying to teach this. Because when we were teaching this, we suddenly realized that literally the entire system is against us. Right? Everything that everybody is learning in other courses. I mean, students would raise questions in finance on how would you do that for affordable loss? And the finance professor has never heard of affordable loss. And they're like, what are you talking about? And let me see, organization behavior, people do not like this idea of people just simply self-selecting. And you're not trying to predict, should I hire her or her? I have to predict, right, in an interview, which one. And you cannot say, both of you come in and let's see what you can do and what we can build together. So it was very interesting, all the tensions. And plus, at that time, we didn't have enough cases, we didn't have enough materials to teach, so we spent a lot of time creating materials. And as I said, then more than 1,000 educators from around the world joined us and made the task a little bit easy. And so we started building this until I also started encountering another thing from students. When you try to teach them the crazy quilt and say, go talk to anybody and everybody. In fact, one assignment I gave to my students is, next time you're on a plane, talk to the person sitting next to you and ask them for $100,000 or some real skin in the game. And they were like, what are you talking about? And I said, it can't be just advice, it can't be just information. It has to be skin in the game. And people just simply would not do it. And that is when we started realizing that we cannot be teaching this only to entrepreneurs. And that's where the idea of the entrepreneurial method came in. I'm told I have only 5 minutes, so I'm going to rush through this thing, but it's not really that long anyway. So the most important question is, why are we teaching entrepreneurship the way we are? Why we have, especially in Europe, we have this history of creating science education, right? Since Francis Bacon wrote Novum Organum, and we took on science, we did not teach science the way we teach entrepreneurship. We don't go and teach a bunch of people and say, oh, do you want to be a scientist? We'll teach you how. And the way we'll decide science curriculum is whether you actually become a scientist and create some inventions or not, right? We would have never gotten past the 18th, 19th century. We would still be living in the 18th century values if we had built science education that way. Instead, we got lucky and we decided that we are going to teach it to everybody. Anybody who had access to education gets to know science. And that's how we are able to build a society capable of scientific reasoning, irrespective of how many people become science. And then we could also invest in infrastructure for doing science for the benefit of humanity and for the benefit of society for the most part. However, you might want to disagree with me on that. And we are able to build a society capable of science and reasoning because everybody has it and different people use it in different ways to build better worlds for themselves and in the process also for others, right? So we are engaged in this process. So this is a series of 6 children's books that one of my colleagues has written, and 4 of them are out already, I believe, and the last 2 are in the works, and they'll come out by the end of the year. But we also have a bunch of people creating curriculum, looking at entrepreneurship as a method. So not teaching people just to start ventures, but to literally navigate the prediction control space, right? So when we think about entrepreneurship as a method, what we are talking about is really navigating that entire space. Right now, if you go, and hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent, hundreds of millions of euros are being spent in creating entrepreneurship education programs, incubators, seed funding, all those kinds of things. But most of the stuff is just hodgepodge. That literally what we are saying. It's like going and asking Newton, can you tell us how you actually did it, and come teach, and we'll teach. We would be so wrong, because Newton was interested in alchemy. You needed a Francis Bacon to really look at how a variety of different scientific inventions actually get done. And so you have to study engineers, you have to study tinkerers before we had a profession called engineers, right? And that is how you actually come up, and you teach people the logic of thinking scientifically. This is what we are trying to do. And then we are having a few more rigorous studies, so it's not just hodgepodge things that we have borrowed blindly from Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valley actually never got built that way. That's a whole other story that we need to think about. So we are teaching things like creativity, personal initiative. We are teaching hypothesis testing. We're literally teaching science to get people to start ventures. And nothing wrong with that. Remember, we need to teach people to navigate all 4 quadrants. So I am all for it. I want that very, very clear. But it is inadequate, right? It is really not. So I might want to say, oh, here is effectual entrepreneurship. This is what we should. No, because that is just the first step that we have done, and a lot of people have contributed to it. But we need to build, as a society, content at every level, and teachers capable of teaching them at every level, and teaching it not just for starting companies. So now let me show you in 3 very quick slides the power of using the framework to develop content, right? So let's start with just, first of all, the emphasis as you go on the control axis is much more on relationship seeking rather than resource seeking. And if you look at entrepreneurship curricula anywhere, that is literally 0 on relationship. Almost everything we teach is on resource seeking, right? So, but now let's look at some existing content and say, can we populate this 2 by 2? What are we teaching? So I already told you the effectual, I got like 15 minutes to tell you the whole story. Maybe I spent 20 minutes. I've told you this already, but look at some of the other things that we have, right? We are teaching trial and error, testing and experimentation, seeking help, how to get help information, feedback. We are teaching agility and nimbleness and resilience. You will see all of these things in different courses, all ad hoc, by the way. There's no single place where you get all of these things. Or you get this whole thing from Silicon Valley, or so-called ideas of Silicon Valley, which is like prototyping, the market opportunity, navigator, lean startup. You would have heard of a lot of these things. Then there is traditional business planning, which still, it's amazing how that survives 30 years after people have argued this does not work, and you need to be doing something better than this. And then we have business model canvas, and we still do pitch competitions all the time. Recently, there is a little bit more on interesting movements that are coming from and they're navigating the space in a different way. And we also have a couple of things that is actually coming from research that is feeding into this space. But see very quickly that there is not much of a game in this bottom right quadrant, except of effectuation at this point. And even as a person who has worked in effectuation for so long, I don't believe that that is the only game in town, right? So we need to be thinking about how to work with that bottom right quadrant. So you need to identify gaps. For example, one set of gaps is the existing content overemphasizes prediction, goal clarity, the importance of resources, and it oversamples on success, right? And really doesn't teach people the relationship between success and failure, which is what we really want to do. It so it underemphasizes uncertainty, goal ambiguity. How many entrepreneurs actually start with a brilliant idea? Pretty close to zero. Don't take my word for it. Look at your favorite innovative unicorn company and go look at what happened in the early stages. Airbnb, people thought it was a stupid idea, and it was, right? The idea that somebody is going to pay to come and lie on your mattress in your unused bedroom is really not. But they had to pay rent in San Francisco, and they were running out of money, and they happened to have that. So it was affordable loss for them to try. So if you go look at the history of Airbnb, as I said, pick your company, but go look carefully at the early history, and you will see the effectual process in action here. And you will see a lot of this uncertainty, goal ambiguity. You will see all the relational stuff that they went through, and the way failure becomes an important part of building a great venture. All right. So we can also use this same thing to think about the scientific method and the entrepreneurial method. So I just want to show you the power of building something that's based on a framework and not ad hoc things that people say, oh, let's go talk to that person, or let's look at that, oh, the worst thing. Let's look at that person's latest tweet because that person happens to be a multi-billionaire or something. And I'm like, okay, you do know that you're paying through your nose to take my classes in this university, and you're learning from YouTube. And I'm like, great, I get paid no matter what. You go learn from YouTube, right? So scientific method is about understanding nature. Entrepreneurship method is about unleashing what is already there with us and in our control. And scientific method deliberately tries not to prescribe purposes, right? And even if the data is clear, we as a people have to come together, and it's usually at the macro level. But this one, at the micro level, small groups of people, it's a method for creating new goals and new purposes worth achieving. Again, the method doesn't prescribe what they are, but the method prescribes a method for you to get to goals. And the more interesting thing is, every goal you come up with is already viable because it's based on your ideas, things within your control, and somebody else committing something real to your venture. So you're not predicting it every step of the way. Every new goal you come up with is also viable. So when we think about this thing, and why should policymakers or people in the ecosystem, people beyond entrepreneurs care about this thing, or just the people who do research here? So I'm going to give you 2 slides, and then I'm going to stop. One is we really need to start collecting better data to develop better content. And today's world with technology, I can imagine, this is just my vision. I'm just going to share it with you for 1 second. We can imagine collecting the actual lived experience of thousands of entrepreneurs from around the world. With AI, there's so much content out there. We just need to set up a thing where we can do that, and then we can build a simulation where experientially people can actually go through some of these experiences and not wait to learn everything the hard way through the school of hard knocks. So creating archives of lived experiences of a variety of different entrepreneurs, and then looking at the framework and thinking about which tool from which part of the quadrant is going to be useful. And in cases where there are no tools, we need to develop tools. All of that can be done, I think. And when I say policymakers, I don't mean necessarily at the EU level. Right? I mean local policymakers. Maybe you are on the board of a committee looking at education in your university. Maybe you're a school principal. There are multiple ways I want you to think about policy as well. So once we are beginning to build more real content based on real experiences, we also want to think about, what content matters and why and how exactly. Like we thought about effectuation and the entrepreneurial method, and you want to start thinking about metrics very differently. What are the metrics that actually make sense? Does it make sense for people just simply to learn how to ask? So I just completed a book on asking on all 4 quadrants, and also moving through the thing and mixing and matching and what to do when just on asking. right? And the pitch is one kind of ask where you know exactly what you want and who has the resource, and you go and pitch them. That is one kind, but there are many kinds of asks. So the question you want to ask yourself is, how do you measure that? This can't be about whether you start a company or not, right? We have to literally develop metrics on people are able to ask. And maybe they will ask on behalf of some nonprofit. Maybe they will learn to put that ask to work in changing the system in some interesting way. And then the most important, we don't have are teachers who can actually do this. So content and metrics have to go hand in hand with teacher training, because the teachers should be involved in co-creating entrepreneurship education as well. And this is the final slide that I want to leave you with. As an immediate task, think about this. So let's think about this is the shape of the curve of ventures in any economy around the world, right? They may vary just a little bit, but the way you want to think about it, most ventures in any economy are going to be really, really, really tiny. Very, very few will grow over time, so will become large. So let's say the unicorns, the non-existent ones. But then when you look at public money that is being spent, they're spending a lot of money in trying to get people to start companies. And I said we're trying to educate them using hodgepodge ideas. And private money just chases the unicorns. And apparently now public money is going to chase the unicorns as well, which just like worries me a little bit, because unicorns don't exist. And then there is a huge growth literature that actually looks at ventures. How can we, increase that curve from the blue to the green? And there are a couple of good ideas there that we look at. But what we really are talking about when we think about teaching entrepreneurship as a method and building entrepreneurship education like we build science is that we can shift the frontier outward. It doesn't matter if fewer people start companies, but what we really want are, is think about how do we move this frontier, especially in a world where AI is taking a larger and larger bite out of the employment. And the very notion of labor markets has to change, right? Because there are lots of entrepreneurs who go in and out of the labor market. And economics got the entrepreneur wrong in many, many different ways. And one of the ways it got it wrong was also to confuse the entrepreneur with the firm. Right? The entrepreneur is not the firm. The entrepreneur has the choice to go in and out of the labor market, sometimes to be in a full-time job and start a company. A third of successful companies are started by people who are still in full-time jobs. So we really need to rethink the way we are thinking about economies, but also communities, ventures, and the market for entrepreneurs, as Christian Nielsen and I call it in a series of pieces of empirical work that we are doing. So one of the things I'm just giving you as an example is to move that frontier is as simple as teaching people to ask. So a lot of 200K companies, we can move to 2 million. We're not making them $200 million companies. And a lot of $2 million companies could go to 20 million if you also teach them to ask like an expert entrepreneur. So I'm sure I'm way over time. So I would like to end, as I always like to end talks, not on my voice, but the voice of actual entrepreneurs. So if you will indulge me, I just want to show you, remember I told you Steve Jobs, supposedly this visionary. I want you to hear from his own voice about the ask. Right? It seems like a tiny little thing that all of us should know, but you will be, if you go out and teach there or get people to do it or try it yourself next time you are on a plane, right? And ask yourself why you don't do it. And remember, it's affordable loss for you because that person has to sit next to you for at least an hour in most flights, right? They cannot run away. And it's also affordable loss because if you made an ass of yourself, maybe you will never see them again, right? But it's good practice, right? So all of you, like a professor, as usual, I'm giving you an assignment. Try this for yourself. But if I cannot convince you, listen to Steve Jobs. All right. 2 topics that we are really not teaching at all will come together.
Didn't want to help me if I asked him for help. I always call him up. I called up, this will date me, but I called up Bill Hewlett when I was 12 years old. And he lived in Palo Alto. His number was still in the phone book. And he answered the phone himself. He said, yes? He said, hi, I'm Steve Jobs. I'm 12 years old. I'm a student in high school, and I want to build a frequency counter. And I was wondering if you had any spare parts I could have. And he laughed, and he gave me the spare parts to build this frequency counter, and he gave me a job that summer in Hewlett-Packard, working on the assembly line, putting nuts and bolts together on frequency counters. He got me a job in the place that built them. And I was in heaven. And I've never found anyone who said no or hung up the phone when I called. I just asked. And when people ask me, I try to be as responsive, to pay that debt of gratitude back. Most people never pick up the phone and call. Most people never ask. And that's what separates sometimes the people that do things from the people that just dream about them. You gotta act. And you've got to be willing to fail. You've got to be willing to crash and burn. With people on the phone, with starting a company, with whatever. If you're afraid of failing, you won't get very far.
All right. So in the spirit of Schumpeter, I hope I actually got to a micro view of what we could do on creative destruction. And one of the things we have to start with is creative destruction of the entrepreneurship education space. So please come with me, every one of you. Do things that are within your control. Work with people who want to work with you. And let's get this thing done. Europe helped build science education and put enlightenment values within the reach of literally billions of people around the world. I think you can do this again with the entrepreneurship method. It took us 200 years to do that with science. Hopefully with technology and all of us pulling together and with a much higher level of education in most economies to begin with, hopefully we'll get it done in 50. And 25, we have got you started already, so next 25 years. So come with me, and thank you for putting up with me, going over time. Thank you for being here and sharing your evening with me. Oh, I was about to invite you, so you came uninvited. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'll just take my water.
Thank you very much, Professor. It's been an honor and a pleasure listening to you, hearing you. And thanks for giving us the hope that we all can be entrepreneurs. That's, I think, one of the main lessons that I learned today. My prediction, Professor, is that you are going to receive plenty of questions. And my feeling, and I have to be honest with you, I have no control at all about the questions that you are going to receive.
Oh, very simple. We just ask for skin in the game.
Yes.
50 euros for the next question. Yes.
So let's make the process through.
Yeah,
So you see how I'm trying to learn?
Absolutely.
So
there is hope for you. Yet.
I already see a question there, and I'm going to give the floor as well to the room in parallel that we've got. The lady there, please wait for the micro to reach you. There is a person here in the third floor, fourth floor.
Thank you very much. My name is Burçak Enel from the European Banking Federation. I very much enjoyed your lecture. Thanks a lot. It really opened up my thinking, and I can think of how it could apply to me as a person. I think many of us probably felt that way. In addition,
but you need to apply it to the goddamn bank.
Yes.
So you're not done yet. Yeah.
I agree, and in fact, my question has a little bit to do with that. With financing of sustainability. I would like to hear from you how this framework applies to purpose-based companies and sustainability. In the 2x2, which elements do you think would help with purpose-based companies, and of course, I'm interested in it from the point of view of financing. Thank you.
Of course. So thank you for that question, and put up with my weird sense of humor here a little bit. I would hope that everything here is applicable to purpose-based companies and to sustainable enterprises, right? The real question is, how the heck do we make it apply to the bank, right? So, so do you believe banks are purpose-based? Otherwise, you wouldn't be working for them and taking a salary from them, right? Yeah, so we would like to believe that. So I think when we say purpose-based, we need to think carefully about what we mean by purpose-based, right? So a lot of the things that we are studying, it's basically about dealing with uncertainty. So if you're in that top left corner, which banks are for the most part, right? They have very clear goals, and they want to, they usually come in much later when the future is predictable, and they ask for these, business plans and NPV calculations and things like that, right? So the question is not, can it apply to purpose-based companies, but how do we make it apply under uncertainty? Because banks are facing as many uncertainties as these purpose-based companies are. The purpose-based companies, interestingly enough, have multiple options, right? They don't have to go to the bank, for example. So one of the things I tell anybody who says that the reason I'm not doing X, Y, and Z that I love, or that I believe is going to make me a billionaire, or that I believe is going to solve some important problem in the world and build a nice community and a decent living for myself, however you define your goals, I always ask them, what are you waiting for? And people will say funding, right? And so I ask them, let's just think about this, right? Okay, you want funding. Let's say, I don't know, 200,000 euros. And I say, okay, Auntie Saras is going to write a check for 200,000 euros. Tell me, what are you going to do with that money? And you will see that over 80% of their shopping list will be they are going to hire somebody, right? They're going to hire some technology team. They're going to hire people to do sales. Very often, they are just thinking about growth in terms of paying people. Maybe sometimes you want to pay vendors. Sometimes you want to induce customers, customer acquisition costs, marketing costs, things like that. And then we tell them, now go talk to these people directly and get them to do it for nothing for you, or payable when able, as a partner in some ways. And so so one of the things we teach people is to say, you actually have many more options than funding. And here is one little funding number for you. 70% of for-profit companies that go public in the United States do not get any formal investment. So you ask yourself, where are they getting their money from? Where did Microsoft get their funding from? IBM funded them, right? Their customer literally paid for their product in advance, which they then went and sold to the entire world, and then built on it a lot. So these relationships, every customer, every vendor, even potential employees are all sources of funding. So get rid of the middleman. And I think we need to teach banks to invest using these principles. And we also did a study of angel investors. So we have an actual investment study that I will send you. And the angel investors are a very good template for funding agency to think about how can we take this and apply it to all kinds of ventures, not only traditional for-profit ventures. And so to do that, you actually go to angel investors. You know why? Because more than half of the angel investors are actually successful entrepreneurs who have sold their company and made a bunch of money. So they think about, so we have actual models of how these investors invest, how they think about evaluating a project, things like that. So you're not looking for NPV. You're actually looking for where can we add value, so if we do this together, we can move the revenue up. So you want to think about that. And again, this is creative destruction of how we do funding in some ways. So we have gotten the thing started, but you want to look at it. And from the point of view of purpose-based companies, every single one of these principles, because you're thinking about uncertainty, is about co-creating the future you want to create. So if there are enough number of people willing to put in skin in the game with you. Any kind of purpose you want and you and the stakeholders together want should be achievable. It doesn't have to be only a traditional for-profit company. It doesn't have to be only a traditional non-profit organization either. You can also create new kinds of organizations, like the Purpose Foundation in Germany. One of the PhD students I'm working with is studying the Purpose Foundation in Germany. So if you want to take a look, there are new organizational forms that people are inventing. And investors should be and can be a part of all of that. But we do need to change their view that everything is about prediction in some ways. So this is why I want to teach the entrepreneurial method to bankers. I want to teach it to scientists. I want to teach it to... I was actually asked to give a workshop to the board of directors of a hospital. And it was amazing that they suddenly looked around and said, there are things that we could be doing instead of just simply always writing grant applications or asking for big endowed funds, because they literally have technology and people that are available. Nobody is working with them to take those things to the next level, right? Except the technology transfer office, and they just do licensing. I said, why won't you pair them with young entrepreneurs in some ways and actually think about it? And so anyway, I can go on and on. I think I'm giving too long an answer for a question that I love, which is, how are we going to disrupt funding? But to make it more positive, not in a bad way, right? Yeah.
There is even hope for banks, I see.
And if we don't have hope for banks, there's no hope for any of us. So we really need to fix that problem, Borikasi. You know that.
Right. I know perfectly well.
Yeah.
Igor, are you there?
Yes.
Oh, no. Igor.
Thank you, Bonnie. Hello, Saras, and thank you a lot for your such inspiring words. I think we have also a question here in the atrium. So, please.
Try to be shorter. Okay, can I say them? Okay. I can see them better here.
I'm taking my chances.
Cannot hear you.
If I speak louder, is that better? Okay. So thank you very much, Professor, for this very interesting presentation. My name is Hervé Buscart. I work for a European Commission agency that supports SME. And my question relates to the role of institution in, let's say, supporting effectual entrepreneur. I mean, going beyond, because you mentioned a lot training, but going beyond training, what could be done in picking up or identifying successful entrepreneurs?
Spoken like a true official of the Commission. You taught us all about not predicting, so please tell us how we can predict. You are not sitting down. You're not done yet with asking the question. Are you really asking me, how do I teach you to predict who will be an effectual entrepreneur? Is that what you're asking? Let me just be sure.
I'm thinking about other methods and other ways that you can support entrepreneurship beyond training.
So, absolutely. I'm with you. Now you can sit down, and I love you. If you were here, I'd give you a hug for your patience with me. So, yes. So, think about all 4 quadrants. We want to be supportive of anybody who is using any toolbox, but we want to think, where is the support actually useful? Right? So if somebody comes up with the business plan, the way we evaluate normally is we really check some due diligence for the numbers. Does the data make sense? Does the team make sense? Right? Do we have all members of the team? And we start thinking a little bit about how exactly we'll structure the funding, and then we'll start giving the milestones and things like that. Right? That's how we normally do funding. And you can take that same thing, and you can now start thinking about, hey, you're asking for $200,000, like I did with my student. Let's say I give you 20,000 euros. What can you do with that? So the way the person reacts, and we can, with or without training, we can actually start thinking about, and you say, what are you using it for? Why don't you go make the deal? And the way people think about partnering, if they will not even ask somebody to partner with them, then you know this is not going to be an effectual case, and you have to make a predictive funding, and you want to use your predictive tools to decide whether you want to fund them or not. But if you want to support effectual entrepreneurs, you really have to focus yourself on understanding partnerships, but you also want to ask yourself, like I said in the banking case, you say, what kinds of partnerships that can I make happen for you? Right? And then watch them, how they actually structure the deal and how they deliver on it. So the crazy quilt principle and partnering is a very, very important thing. And then if we end up building this list of all these experiences that I said, if we have a data collection and an archive of real experiences that people have gone through, you can literally put all your entrepreneurs, whether they are causal or effectual or however novice or experienced, you can literally put them in these scenarios and see how they react. And we actually have measures of whether people are doing things causally or effectually, and we call this like a scenario-based survey. Right? So you're literally putting them in the simulator, like a flight simulator, and you watch their responses. And you need all kinds of people. Some people will be very good at predicting and planning and placing a bet, and some people will be very good at partnering. And sometimes putting two people together on that is the way to go. This is why I'm saying we really need to build this knowledge base and educate everybody, starting with, so there's no getting away from training. But right now, if you want to support an effectual entrepreneur, the two things I would look for is to think about the staging in a different way and start thinking as a funding agency, as a member of the ecosystem, what kind of partnerships can you make happen? Can you put this person in front of people where a customer will fund them, so you don't have to put the money, where a vendor will be willing to give them long terms. So making partnerships happen, having that, I think we can do right away without having to do training. So did I answer your question and not just merely irritate you?
I think you did it, and there is hope indeed for Commission officials and policymakers. Thank you very much. I would love to stay here for the whole evening. We've got the time.
I'm ready if you are.
I think we have a nice dinner tonight. You know, the Spanish food, the Basque food is excellent, and I think everybody is also looking forward for that. I think we have a last question there. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Ciprian Stănescu. I'm from Romania, and I think I'm one of the only persons in the room that I found this very unpleasant. Because I run incubators and accelerators, and I teach entrepreneurship using business model canvas.
Okay.
But at the same time,
and there's a good reason you should feel helpless.
Yeah. Now I feel very, very pleasantly surprised and excited, but I have a question to ask you.
Please.
What is the pedagogy, of actually teaching this sort of new type or first type of entrepreneurship, but in a mass scale? So how do we do it? Because the model that you put there sounds too easy. Yeah. Right?
It is really hard. As I told you, people will just simply not ask. So there is the problem.
How do we do it, and how do we obviously change the culture of the classical incubator, 4 months, 1 million workshops, and so on?
Excellent,
Thank you so much.
Excellent question. I am with you. First of all, I'm on a plane. But most.
Can I sit or?
Yes. Please. That's a good one. This is such an excellent question that you can sit. For all, you never have to get up to ask a question again. So I'm going to give you a very effectual answer, right? So I had this question come up again and again, and then I had a colleague, a friend now, who actually started an accelerator in Bangalore. And he said, I'm going to build the effectual accelerator because you don't know how, right? But if you will work with me and be an advisor, and so I learned a lot. So they've literally created curricula and metrics and ways of thinking through. And so what they do is they really go through this process of partnering. So a lot of the things they teach are about partnering with each other. And the first thing they did to be an effectual accelerator is they said no space and no funding. Right? So how are you going to get people in the room in the first place? See? So the effectual answer is I will literally put you in touch with him. Right? This is how the relational thing works. And you can have a conversation because they've been doing it for 8 years and they have a fantastic record of how the ventures are doing. It's specialized, it's a SaaS accelerator. So I literally put you in touch with him and he would be a better person to answer this question in a practical way, but also really work with you also to scale it. And a lot of people are now both public institutional organizations, but also private funders are trying to get them to scale up. So you can work with him to scale up what they have already done as well. So let's do that. I didn't quite hear what he said. Yes, absolutely, right? And especially if you ask effectually, how do I do this? What are you going to do? And I said, I'm the person on the plane and I will come with you, right? So that is skin in the game, right? Yeah. All right?
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we don't have the time for further questions. We are going to move into a new part of the process, which is about networking.
Yeah.
This is what you've been pleading. So I think this is now the opportunity for all of us to practice and to network. And I would like to salute and thank you very much for your lecture, amazing one. And indeed, it's a hope for bankers, for policymakers, for our children. And I wanted to give you, on behalf of everybody, a great applause for this presentation. Thank you very much.
Gracias. Thank you.
So if I can ask you to slowly move up, and then I think we'll have the networking space. Thank you very much.
Already here, by the way.